Hi everyone, before I start this video, if you are appearing for the Feb-March 2024 session, please make sure to join my Discord server. The link is in the description box below. Okay, so in this video, we'll be going over A-Level Accounting 2023 October-November Paper 4-2 question number 1. This is the structured paper 4, which consists of 2 questions. Each of them will be of 25 marks, and the total time limit given for this paper is 1 hour. So ideally, you should be spending about 30 minutes in order to solve each question. And in this video as well, we'll be attempting to solve this question number 1 in under 30 minutes. So without any further delay, let's get started. G Limited manufactures 2 different products, M1 and V1. The company is going to prepare the budget for the coming year. Currently, one single overhead absorption rate is used, which is based on direct labor hours. Okay, so in order to calculate our overhead absorption rate, we just divide the total overhead by our total direct labor hours. And each product will have a markup of 50% in order to improve the setting of selling prices. So whenever in case of markup, it is really easy to figure out our selling price. The selling price is just going to be equal to cost times 1 plus the markup rate, which in this case is 50%. Then, in a recent budgeting meeting, the finance director proposed to adopt an activity-based costing system in the future. The annual budgeted data for each product is as follows. So all of these are our budgeted data given for sales and production units, and these are equal, which means that all of the produced units will be sold. Then we're given the direct materials per unit, that's the rate. We're given the direct labor hours per unit and direct labor rate per hour. We're also given the number of inspections, number of purchase orders, and number of machine setups. We're also given the annual budgeted fixed overheads, and it is divided into 4 different sections. So we have handling the purchase of direct materials. So these are our different activities based on which we need to divide the overheads accordingly to M1 and V1. The very first activity we have is handling the purchase of direct materials. So a suitable basis for apportioning this overhead will be the number of purchase orders. The second activity we have is inspecting and testing of products. So a suitable basis would be number of inspections. Supervising factory workers. So we are concerned with factory workers and supervising them. So this can be based on the number of hours that the factory workers will work. So this can be based on our direct labor hours. Then the final one we have is setting up and testing of machines. And this can be based on the number of machine setups. And we are given the total budgeted fixed overheads, which is a sum of all of the overheads incurred for these 4 specific activities. All right. Now for the first part, we need to explain what is meant by activity-based costing. So what activity-based costing does is it will utilize our cost drivers. So cost drivers is just going to be the basis of apportionment, which in this case, we have categorized it to be direct labor hours, number of inspections, number of purchase orders, and then the number of machine setups. And these cost drivers will be based on certain activities, which are given in this case to be these 4 activities. And these are the activities that cause the overheads to be incurred, or it can be grouped in certain cost pools. Okay, that's the definition we will be writing down. So activity-based costing uses cost drivers which are based on activities which cause overheads to be incurred. Okay, that's all for the first part. Now for the second part, we need to calculate the overhead absorption rate if a single rate is used. And the criteria given for the single rate is that one single overhead absorption rate is used, which is based on direct labor hours. So the first thing that we need to calculate would be our total direct labor hours. And we have to calculate the total direct labor hours for both the products M1 as well as V1. For M1, we can see that each unit will require 4 direct labor hours, and the total number of units is 5,000. So in order to calculate the total direct labor hours, we can just multiply these two together. So that will be 5,000 times 4 plus we now repeat the same process for V1. So we can see that each unit of V1 will require 1.5 hours of direct labor, and there's a total of 8,000 units. So in order to calculate the total direct labor hours, we can just multiply these two together. This gives the total direct labor hours to be 32,000. Now in order to calculate the single overhead absorption rate, we just need to divide our total fixed overheads, which is given to be 216,000, by our total direct labor hours, which we just calculated to be 32,000. Let's do that. So this is just going to be 216,000 divided by 32,000. And it gives a value of 6.75. And you also need to clearly specify the basis. So in this case, it will be per direct labor hour. That's all for the second part. Now for the third part, we need to prepare the budgeted statement of profit or loss for each product if absorption costing is used. So we are trying to calculate the profit or loss. And in order to calculate profit or loss, we just need to compare our sales revenue to our total cost. So we can start our statement with our sales revenue. But remember, we were not given the value for sales, but we were given the information regarding our markup rate, which is 50%. So in order to calculate our sales, we first need to calculate the total of our cost. So let's start there. We can first start with our direct cost. We can start with the direct materials. For our M1, the direct materials per unit is 35, and in order to calculate the total of our direct materials, we can just multiply this rate to the total number of units for M1, which is 5,000. So that will be 5,000 times 35. Let's write it down. For direct material, we had 5,000 times 35, which gives the value of 175. We now repeat the same process for V1. We can see that the direct material cost per unit is 26. In order to calculate the total direct materials, we just need to multiply it to the total number of units, which in this case is 8,000. So that will be 8,000 times 26, which is also 208,000. So 208,000 for V1. Alright, now we repeat the same process for direct labor. And in this case, we are given the direct labor rate per hour. So we need to multiply it to the total direct labor hours required for M1 as well as V1. For M1, we calculated it to be 5,000 times 4, which is 20,000. So in order to calculate the total of our direct labor for M1, we just need to multiply it by the direct labor rate per hour, which is given to be 15. And this will give the value of 300,000. Let's write it down. We now repeat the same process for V1. So the total of direct labor hour for V1 is 8,000 times 1.5, which is 12,000. And in order to calculate the total of direct labor, we just need to multiply it by the direct labor rate per hour, which is given to be 15 again. This gives a value of 180,000. Let's write it down. Now our final cost will be that of our overheads. Now in order to calculate the overhead, we can just refer to our overhead absorption rate, which is 6.75 per direct labor hour. And in this case, since we are calculating the total overhead, we need the total overhead for M1. In order to do so, we just need to multiply this overhead absorption rate to the total direct labor hour for M1. And for M1, we already have our total direct labor hour to be 20,000. So we just need to multiply 6.75 by 20,000, which gives a value of 135,000. Let's write it down. We now repeat the same process for V1. We just need to multiply 6.75 to the total direct labor hour for V1, which we already calculated to be 12,000. So that will be 12,000 times 6.75, which results in the value of 81,000. Now we need to add all of our cost and get the value for the total cost. For M1, that is just going to be 175,000 plus 300,000 plus 135,000, which results in 610,000. For V1, that's going to be 208,000 plus 180,000 plus 81,000, which results in 469,000. Now remember, we are yet to calculate our sales revenue. And the markup was 50%, which means that the sales is just going to be cost times 1 plus 50%. And now we have already calculated the value for our cost as well. So for the sales revenue for M1, that is just going to be 610,000 times 1 plus 50%. And this can also be written down as cost times 1.5. So our sales revenue for M1 will be 610,000 times 1.5, which is also 915,000. We now repeat the same process for V1. That will be 469,000 times 1.5, which is also 703,500. And remember, this statement is prepared in order to calculate the profit or loss. Now we can do that. Since we already have our sales revenue as well as the cost, in order to calculate the profit, we just need to subtract our cost from the sales revenue. So for M1, that will be 915,000 minus 610,000, which is also 305,000. Since this is a positive amount, it's a profit. Now for V1, that will be 703,500 minus 469,000, which results in 234,500, which is again a profit. But we already knew that there would be a profit, since in this case we are increasing our cost by 50% in order to get the selling price, which means that our selling price would definitely be higher than cost, which would ensure that at all times there would be a profit on both of our products. Okay, this is all for part 3 of this question. Let's move towards the fourth part. We now need to prepare the budgeted statement of profit or loss for each product if ABC is used. Okay, so in this case, the only thing that will be changing will be our overheads, which will then bring a change in our sales revenue, since our sales revenue is based on total cost, which means that our profit will also be changing. So the only thing remaining constant in this case will be our direct material and direct labor. So we can just copy down these same amounts for these two headings. Let's write it down. So we are yet to calculate the sales revenue. Our direct material will remain the same at 175,000 for M1 and 208,000 for V1. Then we have our direct labor, which will again remain the same at 300,000 for M1 and 180,000 for V1. Now for the overheads, we now need to split it based on the different activities. Okay, let's write down the heading of the first activity, that is handling the purchase of direct materials. Let's have a look at the given information again. So you can see that the total overhead for handling the purchase of direct materials is given to be 43,200. And we've already decided that a suitable basis for this overhead would be the number of purchase orders. Now, in order to calculate the correct apportionment towards both of our products, we first need to calculate the total of our basis or the cost driver, which in this case is given to be 20 and 25. So the total is just going to be 45. Now, if we are calculating the apportionment towards the product M1, we start with the total overhead, that is 43,200. Then we just utilize our fraction. So in this case, out of 45 purchase orders, 20 belong to M1. So the fraction is just 20 out of 45. This gives the value of 19,200. We repeat the same process for V1 as well. I'm not going to write it down, but I'm going to say it. So we start with the amount of 43,200, then we multiply it by the relevant fraction, which in this case will be 25 by 45, which results in the value of 24,000. Let's write down the amounts. So that will be 19,200 for M1 and 24,000 for V1. Now we just repeat the same process for our remaining activities as well. So the second activity is inspecting and testing of products. Let's write it down. So inspecting and testing of products. Okay, the total overhead given is 28,800, and a suitable basis for this is number of inspections. Again, the first step is to calculate the total of our suitable basis, which in this case is 20 plus 30, which is 50. So if we're trying to figure out the apportionment towards the product M1, we start with the total overhead, that's 28,800, and we multiply it by the relevant fraction, which in this case would be 20 out of 50. which gives the value of 11,520. We repeat the same process for V1. So that will be 28,800 multiplied by 30 divided by 50, which results in the value of 17,280. Let's write down these amounts. So for M1, we calculated it to be 11,520. For V1, it was 17,280. Now we move towards the third activity, which is given to be supervising factory workers. This is supervising factory workers. And for this one, our suitable basis was the direct labor hours. But remember, we cannot be using our direct labor hour per unit. We need to utilize our total direct labor hours, which for M1, we calculated it to be 20,000, and for V1, we calculated it to be 12,000. So the total is just going to be 20,000 plus 12,000, which is 22,000. Now, if we're trying to figure out the apportionment towards M1, we start with the total, 96,000, multiplied by 20,000, divided by 22,000. Sorry, the total should be 32,000. So divided by 32,000, which would result in 60,000. Then we repeat the same process for V1. So that will be 96,000 multiplied by 12,000 divided by 32,000, which results in 36,000. Let's write it down. So for M1, it was 60,000. And for V1, it was 36,000. Now we have our final activity of setting up and testing of machines. The total overhead for our last activity is given to be 48,000, and the suitable basis would be our number of machine setups. So firstly, we need to calculate its total. That's 12 plus 18, which results in 30. If you're trying to figure out the apportionment towards product M1, that will be 48,000 multiplied by 12 divided by 30, which results in the value of 19,200. Then we repeat the same process for V1. So that would be 48,000 multiplied by 18 divided by 30, which results in the value of 28,800. Let's write it down. So for M1, that is going to be 19,200. And for V1, that is going to be 28,800. Okay, now that we've completed all of our costs, let's calculate the total cost. We just add all of these. For M1, that's going to be 175,000 plus 300,000 plus 19,200 plus 11,520 plus 60,000 plus 19,200, which results in 584,920. Now we repeat the same process for V1. So that's going to be 208,000 plus 180,000 plus 24,000 plus 17,280 plus 36,000 plus 28,800, which results in 494,080. Alright, now we need to calculate our sales revenue, and our markup is still the same. So that will be sales will be equal to cost times 1 plus 50%, which means we can also write it down as cost times 1.5. Okay, for M1, that will be 584,920 times 1.5, which results in 877,380. And for V1, that will be 494,080 times 1.5, which results in 741,120. Now we need to calculate our profit. Again, there will be profit in both cases, since we are already increasing our selling price by multiplying a certain rate to our cost, which means that the selling price will be greater than cost at all times, which ensures that there is a profit. For M1, that is just going to be 877,380 minus 584,920, which results in 292,460. That will be the profit. Then for V1, that will be 741,120 minus 494,080, which results in a profit of 247,040. This concludes the fourth part of this question. We can now move towards the next one. Okay, we need to advise the directors whether or not the ABC system should be adopted in setting selling prices for the coming years. We need to support our answer with reference to calculations in Part C and Part D. So the calculation in this case would be the comparison of selling prices for both of our products in part C as well as part D. So in our calculations, we have included our total selling price, but in the calculation for this question, we need to show the unit selling price. Okay, let's do that. So we have product V1 and product M1. These will be our unit selling prices, but we have two different bases. So one is a single overhead absorption rate, and another one is with utilization of activity-based costing. Now, since we have our total sales revenue, in order to calculate the selling price per unit, we can just divide the total revenue by our number of units. So for M1, we have the total revenue of 915,000 in part C. In order to calculate the selling price per unit, we can just divide it by the total number of units, which is 5,000 for M1. We repeat the same process for V1 as well, where the total units is 8,000. Okay, so that's 915,000 and 703,500. So 915,000 and 703,500. In order to calculate the unit selling price, we just need to divide this by the total number of units. This will give the selling price for M1 to be 183. For V1, it will be 87.94. We now repeat the same process, but based on values in our part D. So that's 877,380 and 741,120. Let's write it down. So that's 877,380 by 5,000, which results in the selling price per unit to be 175.48. And for V1, that was 741,120 divided by 8,000, which results in the unit selling price of 92.64. Okay, now we need to make some comments as well. As we can see, the selling price per unit utilizing our single overhead absorption rate, which is our absorption rate, for M1, it's greater than the one when activity-based costing is utilized. And remember that activity-based costing sets a appropriate selling price because it divides the overheads based on each particular activity. So the division of overheads is more accurate, which means that the selling price is also more accurate. So what we can say in this case is if we utilize absorption rate, then M1 will be overpriced. Let's write it down. Utilization of absorption rate results in M1 to be overpriced, and we look for the same thing in V1 as well. So we can see that utilizing the absorption rate, our selling price per unit is lower for V1, so it will be underpriced, and V1 to be underpriced. So if we are overpricing the product, then it just means that our product is less competitive, since now it has a selling price greater than that of those competitors. But if we are underpricing our product, then it just means that there is a loss of possible revenue as well as loss of profit. Let's write it down. Overpricing means that the products are less competitive and underpricing means that the products are losing revenue or profit. Now, based on these factors, you need to make a decision. So in cases where you are asked whether or not the activity-based system should be adopted, I always recommend that you should write that activity-based costing should be implemented, but only if there is more than one product. Because if there's only one product, then you don't need to divide the overheads on two different products. You can just include the total overhead under our absorption rate as well. And this is because, like I said before, activity-based costing system, it just apportions the overheads based on different level of activities, which ensures that the cost is more accurate than the cost where we implement the absorption rate, which means that this also provides a more accurate selling price per unit. Let's write it down. The directors should adopt activity-based costing system in setting selling prices for the coming years, as it would be more accurate compared to absorption system. That concludes the first question of paper 4.2. If you found this video useful, make sure you like the video and leave a comment below, and make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit the bell icon so that you do not miss any of these videos in the future. Thank you.